Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Curtis, and today I'm going to talk about episode 1 of The Waterfront. The episode begins with Curtis and Troy on the boat. Curtis is steering the boat while Troy is watching the radar. Troy notices that an object is approaching the boat and alerts Curtis, who tells him to go out and open the hull and make it quick. Troy goes out and uncovers a container full of what I believe to be drugs. Troy's getting ready to look through it, but he stops once he hears a loud noise. He goes over to the edge of the boat where he sees another boat, but there's nobody on it. He turns around and he is actually surrounded by 2 men with big guns. Curtis, who told him to make it really quick, he's starting to, worry like, where is he at? And he actually calls out to him, but of course he's not going to answer. And so it looks like he's about to go out and look for him, but it's too late because then he is actually surrounded by men with guns. He attempts to make a run for it, but he's ultimately caught, and he actually is hit with the gun. And then the men actually wrap him and Troy up in the net and throw them overboard into the water. The next morning, we are introduced to Kane, who is sitting on the edge of the tub looking at his most recent text messages that he sent to Curtis and Troy in a group chat regarding their whereabouts. Kane looks concerned and honestly it looks like he wants to throw up. He eventually gets up, washes his face, and goes downstairs to see his woman. I'm not sure if that's his girlfriend or his wife. And he also sees his daughter. And he lets them know that he's not sure if he's going to make it home that night. And after that, he actually drives to the beach where he sees the boat that Curtis and Troy were on. Kane decides to drive off just as DEA agent Sanchez arrives on the beach, where he is greeted by Sheriff Porter, who tries to get his attention, but he says, not right now, I have to do my job. And so he actually walks up to another DEA agent, and the agent tells him that the hull was empty and that they did not find any evidence that there were any drugs on the boat. And it's at this point that we find out that the boat is registered to Kane, who is the son of Harlan Buckley, and we find out that Harlan is actually the owner of the fish house, which is really big in town. And Sanchez says that he plans to meet with Kane. After this, we see Harlan and Rhonda sleeping in the bed. Harlan eventually wakes up, stretches, gets up, and attempts to walk over to the dresser to get a bottle of liquor, but he ends up falling down to the ground before he can reach the bottle, and he believes that he's having a heart attack, so he actually throws something towards Rhonda, and she eventually wakes up and he says, hey, I think I'm having a heart attack, and she's like, what do you want me to do? And he says he wants her to, 1, call the ambulance, and then 2, call his wife. His wife, Belle, shows up at the hospital, and she's actually greeted by Rhonda, who says that she believes that she's responsible for everything that happened. Belle, who is surprisingly calm, tells her that she has everything under control and that she just needs to go home and let her deal with it. And then she goes into the hospital room where she sees Harlan, who has electro patches on his chest. And at this point, he's inquiring about the guys who are on the boat, and he's also trying to figure out where Kane is. Rhonda tells him that she doesn't have an answer for him. She doesn't know because she's there with him. And he decides, what? I don't have time for this. I need to figure it out. And he actually snatches the patches off and they leave. Kane goes to the courthouse where he meets his cousin Lynette. And he asks her to update the registration for the boat because he wants it to show Curtis' name instead of his name. And he also wants her to backdate the change. She tells him that she'll be willing to do it if he can promise to pay off her $12,000 debt, in which he does agree. And he also asks her, what's going to happen with, Curtis' signature. And she tells him that she'll be able to copy it from his fishing license. So clearly this is not her first time doing something like this. And she also tells him that she will be able to backdate the change for about 3 months. And so it will be, let's say, around June, and that she will also notarize the document. After this, Kane rushes out to meet his mother, Belle, who tells him that it was a false alarm and that his father was not actually having a heart attack. And it's at this time she actually inquires about Curtis, Troy, and the boat. Kane tells her that the boat washed up on shore and that, he doesn't actually know where Curtis and Troy are. Belle tells him that he needs to tell his father about what's going on, but he's afraid to. And then at this point, she asks him if he has heard from his sister Bree. He tells her that he has not, and she tells him that if she reaches out, just to not say anything, keep everything on the low, keep everything between them. And he says gladly because he doesn't like her anyways. And the next scene, we actually meet Bree. And she's at a swimming competition that she's looking from afar. And it's at this point that she's actually confronted by her child's father, whose name is Rodney. And he threatens to call the cops if she doesn't leave. And so, of course, she ends up leaving. Bree ends up going to the fish house where she is actually greeted by Sanchez. And Kane actually notices that Sanchez is there. So he actually rushes out to talk to him. And Sanchez tells him that he is there to talk about the boat. And it's at this point that Kane lies and tells Sanchez that he actually sold the boat to Curtis. Sanchez asks him, when exactly did this happen? Like, when did the transaction occur? And Kane says, I'm not really sure about the exact date, but it did happen sometime in June. And then Sanchez leaves. After this conversation, Kane goes into the fish house where he's actually punched in the face by his father, Harlan, who tells him that he better not get up or he's going to get punched again. And then, eventually his father does let him get up and he says, go get a drink, put it over your eye because it is starting to swell up. And he tells him that he wants to know why he is selling drugs, how long has he been doing this, and also wants to know who he's working with. He tells him that he's doing it because the business is getting ready to go under. He tells him that he only completed about 3 runs and that he's working with a person named Hoyt Piper, who his father clearly does not like, nor does he respect. And he also lets him know that there were around, let's say, $10 million worth of drugs on the boat. His father tells him that he needs to reach out to Hoyt and tell him that they can no longer work together. Kane goes to meet Hoyt, who believes that he may be wearing a wire. He pulls a gun out and tells him that he needs to take off his clothes to prove that he's not wearing a wire. Kane, is hesitant at first, but eventually agrees to do so. After this, he puts his clothes back on and then they go for a walk. And Hoyt tells him that the person named Owen believes that he was the one who set everything up, that he basically made a side deal and that he was the one that took the drugs. Kane attempts to plead his case, but Hoyt does not believe him. Kane begs Hoyt to reach out to Owen and tell him that he did not have anything to do with it, but Hoyt says he does not want to. And it's at this point that Kane says that he wants to talk to Owen directly, but Hoyt says we can't do that. And then also he says, he's not even here. And then, he says, where can I find him? Where can I reach him? And Hoyt says to not really worry about that because Owen is going to find him first. I said, uh-oh. Sheriff Porter comes over to visit Harlan to talk about, what's going on and also about the boat. Harlan tells the sheriff that the boat was actually sold to Curtis a couple of months back, so therefore his son doesn't have any connection to it. It doesn't appear that the sheriff is actually buying this, and he actually tells him that, the feds all over the East Coast, they're going to, eventually find out what's going on, but Harlan doesn't seem to be too concerned, or at least that's the way that he's presenting it in front of the sheriff. The next 2 scenes, in my opinion, they really did not offer much, so I'm just going to kind of put them together. Kane, he runs into an old friend named Jenna, and as far as Belle and Harlan, they get into an argument about his drinking and his drug use, in which she puts some of the blame on herself. After this, Harlan, Belle, and Kane meet to discuss the meeting that Kane had with Hoyt. Harlan believes that Hoyt is responsible for what happened on the boat and believes that he is trying to place the blame on Kane. Harlan tells Kane that he needs to go directly to the source to get information, but Kane does not actually know who the source is. Harlan tells Kane to reach out to Hoyt and tell him that he wants to meet with him to resolve the issue and also to make a deal. And surprisingly, Hoyt actually agrees to meet with them. And Kane actually leads them to a boat where Harlan's waiting for him. Hoyt is very unsure about getting on the boat, and I was just like, there is absolutely no way I would have got on that boat. But eventually he does get on the boat, and then the 3 of them, they start drinking, but Hoyt actually stops once he realizes that the boat is moving. So he goes out and he notices that the boat has drifted off, and he also notices that there are a bunch of men on the boat. He didn't see them at first. Me personally, I would have jumped. They were not that far from the dock, so me personally, I would have just jumped and hope for the best, but that's just me. And, eventually he goes back inside. They're having a low conversation, and then they go back out. And we can see that they are now pretty much in the middle of the ocean. And one of the guys who was on the boat actually starts pouring blood and maybe some like fish meat inside of the water. And it actually attracts some sharks. And then the men actually grab Hoyt and they hang him out the edge of the boat and they put his head in the water a couple of times. And Harlan basically says, you need to tell me where the drugs are. It does take some time, but Hoyt eventually tells him that the drugs are inside of a shed. In the next scene, we see Bree's son and Daphne, who is the court-appointed monitor at the fish house. Bree escorts him to a different area of the fish house. Daphne tells him that she's going to sit a few tables down while they talk and have a conversation. Bree's son reveals that he is upset because he thought that he was going to the mall, but she tells him that she was not able to fill out the paperwork. She tries to get insight on her son's life, but he is being very short with her, to the point that she actually calls him a prick in front of Daphne, and I was like, oh, don't do that. In the next scene, we see Harlan, Kane, and Hoyt go to the shed. Hoyt gives him the code, and Harlan goes inside where he finds the drugs. Sheriff Porter actually arrives and starts to question them. Hoyt tells him that he is being kidnapped and also tells him that he did not say anything. And I, along with Harlan, we were both confused at this point. And the next thing you know, Sheriff Porter pulls his gun out, he shoots and kills Hoyt, and I was shocked. I didn't know what's going on. And it turns out that Sheriff Porter is actually Owen. So Sheriff Porter tells him that Harlan and his family basically they owe him, and that if they want to feel like they're partners, they could be. And he also tells Kane that it's time for him to get his hands dirty. And it's at this point that we see Harlan Kane dumping Hoyt's body into the water. And Harlan says that the alligators would take care of the body. And I was just like, dang. I'm going to condense the last couple of scenes together. So we see Kane, he goes to Jenna's house and he attempts to be flirtatious, attempts to kiss her, but he is rejected because she says, I'm married, you are married, I respect your wife, I hope you respect my husband. He doesn't really care, but eventually he gets the hint and he just backs off. And then after this, we see Harlan talking to Belle, and he basically says, he took a step back and he reveals, it was super easy for him and that he actually felt comfortable. And, she's just like, you know what, that's okay. She doesn't really judge him at this point, and then they walk off, and that is where the episode ends. I want to thank you all for watching my review. I really do appreciate it. If you could, please like, comment, share, subscribe. Like I said, I would appreciate it. I will review the next couple of episodes. You all have a great rest of your day.